everybody, it's Carm here. I'm back on a Friday evening. I wanted to come on and share an artist I've been revisiting throughout the week. Been a fan of for quite a while and been meaning to do a feature on. May have touched on him here and there over the years, but yeah, every time I get back around to it, get sidetracked. But I wanted to talk about Kit Watkins, keyboardist, really multi-instrumentalist, composer, born 1953. We actually share the same birthday, 22 years apart, November 20th. And yeah, something I've enjoyed for quite some time. So this goes out to my keyboard-loving friends out there. You know Gary, I'm sure Gary's aware of him, and you know Shannon is a keyboard lover, and think of Daryl too. I think Daryl would appreciate it, and some of you who may or may not be familiar. This is what I have by him, and have been revisiting throughout the week. I have quite a bit here, but this is probably not even half of his overall discography, and I'm always learning of new things that he's coming out with. Been very active as a solo artist over the last really 40 years, and was in a group called Happy the Man, as well as he was in Camel briefly in the late 70s. And well, I'll just start right in with Happy the Man. Third, Better Late, which I believe was a recorded as a demo to what would be the third album. I think they disbanded shortly after this and eventually got back together at various points. But, yeah, Kit Watkins, the chief composers here, and played keyboards and flute along with a group here, as well as Coco Russell, who played drums and percussion, and he would go to collaborate with a little bit later on. And I'd only found this out recently that Happy the Man was actually, I'm sure many of you know this who were fans, Genesis. That was a single of theirs in 1972, which didn't appear on any of their proper albums. And I'm not sure, I think their name may actually come from something else, possibly more esoteric, not quite positive. Although I personally can hear some Genesis in their music, maybe a little bit of the mid-70s and even some Trespass, as well as what's known as the Canterbury style. Jazz, you have some jazz aspects, a little bit of what can be called fusion, as well as I'd say even American pop rock. They're from Virginia, as is Kit Watkins himself, and a mixture of instrumental and vocal, which I actually like the vocals on here. Wouldn't quite know who to compare it to, but I like the approach. Very much kind of that rooted in that area of rock, but you could also kind of hear what Kit was going to be doing in the future, things that were more introspective and ethereal. The Falcon, Wild Chrome, Yellow Shine, Labyrinth are standouts for me personally, although I really like the whole album. And yeah, it's nice. It's been nice hearing this after quite a while. And again, I think those touch points. If you like those other groups, if you like Genesis, you like Canterbury, and some of the pop rock that came out in the later '70s. It's a nice kind of subtle mixture of those. I definitely recommend it for that. Next up, we're getting into Kit's solo career here. Your early solo works, 1980 to '82, which is basically the whole of his first album, Labyrinth, and part of his second album, Frames of Mind. On here, he collaborates with Coco Russell, drums and percussion, and Kit himself playing various keyboards and flute. And you could hear kind of a carryover from Happy the Man, although more of Kit's own compositional sense. Something about his keyboard playing, even beyond the technical variety and stylistic, there's something about his, if you call it chord sequences or chord progressions, that are so much him. Even when he's coming around to the original theme, he's always adding in little things, little touches, little accents, and even a whole nother structure, but in a very kind of subtle way, and playful without being going too far with it or making it seem obvious. Something you really have to listen to. I think his music in general, you can't really get a sense of it from, I mean, it's true of a lot of music, of course, from just like a 30-second sample. I think you really have to hear the arc of the piece as it goes. And I think it's true of just about everything of his. There's always a lot of variety there. And you could hear that early on in his compositional and playing sense. Labyrinth, the title cut, is one I really like. That one goes through a lot of interesting changes. Spring 1980, very beautiful, lush, almost orchestral piece, but in a very subtle way on keyboards. And as he gets further into Frames of Mind from 82, going a little more into the digital realm, drum machines and things like that. Though seems at pains not to use those as mere gimmicks, even getting further into the 80s, but really using them more as compositional tools. I mean, as I feel one should, but yeah, it never becomes, for the sake of itself. He really finds a way to transcend, maybe the limitations of, the transition between analog and digital. He found a really pretty smooth way getting through that. There's some revving out there, but yeah, nice beginning here. Next up, we have Kit and Coco in Time, a collaborative, pretty even collaboration here between him and Coco Russell, who does a lot of the composing as well. And this is really fun, a mixture of styles. It sounds like they're really just having a lot of fun together. Again, hearing kind of a carryover from Happy the Man, but really, this is very much a duo thing here, exchanging and bouncing ideas off each other. I like Coco's compositions as well. Rumble in the Ruins, it's kind of a Latin feel, kind of jaunty. Do You Mind, kind of some wry humor here and there in some of these. Over the Andes, Watkins' piece is not only my favorite piece on the album, but one of my favorites of his of all time. Very much like the title, you could imagine kind of an aerial view of maybe hiking in the mountains, and it has a very distinctive waltz-like rhythm. We could even kind of imagine that like a waltz. But I'm thinking of the term I've been hearing more of lately, which I don't think I'd heard much of in the past. When people talk about deep cuts on albums, I would ascribe the term to this as well, but in a different way, in that it really is a deep piece of music, a very deep feeling, deep evocation of whatever they're trying to express, what that vision is. I think it's just I find it a very powerful piece. And, definitely recommend that. Yeah, it's been my favorite ever since I've heard this. Après Midi, it gets a little bit darker and more atmospheric. And Bob's tune has a real nice mixture of, I guess, the more ethereal, romantic, as well as getting more playful. But yeah, real enjoyable collaboration here. Now we're jumping ahead into the, really towards the end of the decade, to 1989. The previous one was from 84, 85. Azure. And this is my introduction to Kit as far as hearing his music. I picked this up in a shop probably close to 15 years ago. And I'm glad I'd kept his name in mind. I was like, oh, finally, here's something by him, seeing it out and about. Now, in here, he's definitely ensconced in the digital realm of DX7 and D50 and the drum machines. But again, in my opinion, he really transcends the stereotype of those instruments, the limitations, the perceived kind of sterile, cold, kind of one-dimensional quality. To me, he transcends them by miles, just in the way he arranges them and just his imagination and just the way he structures things. And neat thing with this, with the notes here, the detail he goes into on each piece, giving it the time signature, if there is one for each one, as well as what instrument, what keyboard represents as far as an instrumental color, and a little background and on the inspiration of each piece. I would say I think of this as being Overcast music when I first heard it. It's dark, but not in a foreboding way, but more of a reflective, kind of interior way. this is where the music really gets particularly introspective, and you're really getting deep into what he's feeling in a sense, or at least that's what I get from it, and more than he had previously expressed from what I'd heard. And a little different on this album is that he covers a couple pieces by others, that people other than that were in Happy the Man. There's I Remember Me from Jan Hammer, and Niram from Philip Catherine, which I think I had first heard that piece from Mike Gibbs' Only Chrome Waterfall Orchestra. Really beautiful piece, and also on Robert Wyatt's Sleep album, which he retitles Marianne, and adds, of course, his vocals and lyrics. And on here, it's just beautifully played and orchestrated. It's kind of an aquatic feeling to start, but very dreamy and reflective. Almost like you're kind of going to the bottom of the ocean floor and exploring down there. Just a very a lot of depth to this album. And again, I feel transcending, those, the digital instruments of the time, really making it something very personal. And yeah, it's a beautiful intro to him. And next up in 1990, we have Sunstruck, kind of taking up where the previous one left off. Although I'd say by contrast, this is brighter, sunnier music, kind of like the title. Maybe more major key than minor key, possibly. I hear a lot of jazzy touches too in the rhythm and his chords, almost like he's drawing slightly from bop in a way, but not soloing over it like a jazz. He's finding other approaches. But yeah, and again, his use of texture and color and just the way he paces things is just so distinctively his own. And yeah, it's just a beautiful continuation. And again, never allowing the instrumentation to sound sterile or one-dimensional or cold. He always keeps a lot of vibrancy to it. Still quite a bit here, so try to go a little quicker. Now he's going into really a much different territory now. Kind of somewhat where the last one left off, getting more atmospheric and a little more soothing, quieter and reflective. Now we're getting very much into the ambient realm. Thought Tones, Volume 1. This is pure, dark, deep night, nocturnal ambient, kind of sort of bump in the night music, I think of it as, or something to tint the air if you're playing it at a low volume. And he was pointing out in the notes here that this was drawn, he wasn't playing synthesizers on here, but it was drawn mostly from acoustical sources, even including dulcimer and various even like household objects, but processing them, kind of reconstituting them into like a drone or a shimmer. Yeah, very deep and powerful stuff here. And then you have the second volume of Thought Tones, which did have synthesizers, though has a very similar characteristic, kind of like doing similar things but with different sources. And this is actually the one that's, I don't know if you could hear it, it's in the background, fairly low. Yeah, a lot of his stuff on YouTube, it looked like it had been taken down or blocked, so didn't know about the less of a risk with the copyright. But yeah, both of these, if you like, music for 2 in the morning, it's just perfect for that time. Again, very deep, dark, but not maybe a little foreboding, but depending on your mood, be very enjoyable. Went slightly out of sequence with this next one, A Different View. This is actually released in between the Thought Tones. Like the title, it really is that. He's doing classical interpretations here now. Electronic renditions of Satie, Chopin, Khachaturian, Stravinsky. Different than someone like Tomita, who, when he would do classical interpretations, would emphasize more, I think, the actual stuff of what went into it as far as the synthesizers, the effects, although of course very painstakingly done. Or someone like Don Dorsey of this time, the 80s and 90s, who was emphasizing more well, the digital equipment, kind of showing more what it could do. Even though it was very well played, it was kind of a lot thrown into the pot. I think here, he's using it very sparingly, economically, maybe just a couple of voicings, drawing from kind of a smaller palette, but making a very very direct point. Sometimes more piano-based, electronic piano-based, or somewhat harpsichord sounding. Even the strings are very transparent sounding. But again, using those similar instrumentation of those kinds of synthesizers. And throughout the album's quite kind of a slow, languid pace. Pretty consistent mood throughout. And yeah, it's a nice, again, a different view of electronic classical of those various periods. And next up here, we're in 1991 Sampler, which I probably could have just shown and talked about this and have been done with it. This is a really nice overview of his roughly his first 10 years as a solo artist. I like how they have this laid out, where you have symbols by each track denoting which album it came from, as well as a letter for each. If you're interested in a certain style of music or a genre or approach, it could tell you, kind of point the way as to what he's doing on there. Progressive, new age, classical, global, electronic, ambient. So whatever your preference, you can draw from this, and fairly easy to find, I think, and pretty cheap. So I found it that way in one of the shops. But yeah, this would be a good introduction if you see it around and not quite sure where to start. This is a good spot. Well, next up here, we're going a little further into the 90s. 1992. Wet, Dark, and Low. As ever, still in the electronic keyboard realm, though the sounds are getting more organic as the technology is changing, more samplers involved, and as ever, he's using it very much in a distinctive way, very much reflecting his compositional sense, and again, his very distinctive way of phrasing and sort of chord patterns and melodies. Much more rhythmic, adding in some acoustic percussion. You're getting more of a, you can hear other influences from around the world. You could say like tribal drumming. Again, adding a whole new dimension. And also on here, you're starting to see what I think of as kind of this interesting alternating approach between cuts, where you'll start with something that's more moody and reflective, introspective and slower, and something that's kind of bouncy, playful, rhythmic, and kind of just the contrast between them are becoming a little starker, but still has an interesting flow, because there's so much in each piece itself that I personally don't mind if there's kind of a quick change, because it's like there was so much to chew on, so to speak, in each individual piece. You have Brave Water, which is both very rhythmic and atmospheric. Carl Weingarten also guests on here on guitar, hitting some really nice atmospheres. Then you have Funky Duty, which is, probably overuse the term whimsical, and but it definitely has that feel to it. Maybe even bordering on silly a little bit, but there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And then you have something like Liquidity, which goes into something more impressionistic. So he's always kind of, again, overall it's playful, but it just has a really interesting, just the pacing and the sequences. Just something he made very much his own. I really like this piece, Snakes and Apples. It's kind of a blending of all those approaches. But yeah, he still has that the distinctive keyboard approach, that approach to keyboards. Yeah, Wet, Dark, and Low. Yeah, not nearly as kind of murky or dark or creepy as it might imply there. There's a lot of other emotions and feelings and just things happening there. And next up, we're going to 1993, Circle, and somewhat returning to the thought tones territory of ambient, although on here, not emphasizing so much synthesizer or we even want to call it found sounds, but he's actually using field recordings here. There's various areas around we lived in Virginia. Sounds of birds, crickets, frogs, everyday sounds. Yeah, crickets, great horned owl, deer snorts, light rain, heavy rain, babbling brook. Yeah, recorded by Kit Watkins in Linden, Virginia. I think he'd been based in for quite some time. But yeah, it's another approach to ambient, emphasizing the natural world rather than things that are reconstituted. And then again, the synthesizers are more of a backdrop, very light. But in some ways, it's relaxing. But a lot of times, you'll have the animals kind of just coming out of nowhere, and it can give you a bit of a jolt if you're gonna be in the right frame of mind for this. But yeah, again, another view of what he does. And then getting close to the end here. Kinetic Vapors, 1993, coming right after. Kind of along similar lines to the Wet, Dark, and Low. Probably getting a little more into, little back into the atmospherics, at least as far towards the end. Again, blending the ambient with, the more kind of, say, the more earthbound, the more rhythmic. Yeah, Cyborg Whistler. There's a lot of different colors and approaches there. Again, it's playful, atmospheric in equal measure. The impulsive flow is the closest thing that I've heard him do to something like Tangerine Dream, or as far as the sequencer, which is used very subtly and much more. It's much more like a very kind of quiet rhythmic bed, but not emphasized too much to where it's overtaking the piece, but just almost transparently used. And Gay Spirit is another one of my all-time favorite pieces of his. To me, it's just exuberant, restrained exuberance, if it doesn't sound like an oxymoron, but it somehow manages both. But I really like that piece. If you're ever down, it's a really good piece to put on. Again, very rhythmic, but also he has a certain kind of ascending the way he's playing keys, which is just I don't know, to me it strikes a certain sweet spot emotionally that, I don't know, I just always feel that. And then as you go, it's very much like the titles, the rest of the album. You're getting into something a lot slower and more languid and reflective. And yeah, it's just another very powerful one. Yeah, Kinetic Vapors from 1993. And I had mentioned most of these are on his own label, Linden Music. I think he had alternated between various labels, but these are mostly on his label. And next up, you have Holographic Tapestries. Now, he's taken an approach on this album, which he was kind of alluding to on previous albums, where he would kind of alternate between different approaches. Have like an upbeat rhythmic piece and then something much more reflective and introspective. On here, he's doing it much more pointedly, where you can see he has it actually programmed into 2 sets, where each piece alternates. Yeah, the odd number, as he was saying, are the more introspective, slower pieces, more reflective, and the second set, the even numbered pieces, more rhythmic, playful, jaunty. Although there's times even partway through the album where they sort of intersect, and there's a little bit of each in each one. So even then, it's still you still has kind of a familiar blend. And he was pointing out too, you could program your CD player to just play one side or play the other, depending on the mood you want. But even though it kind of, like one of the pieces that are supposed to be the more rhythmic and highly charged is called Hills. That's one of the most beautiful pieces I've ever heard him do. Very, very hard on one sleeve, very melodic, romantic, just a gorgeous piece. And the first piece, Timetable, is this really nice kind of high-end ostinato figure being played, where he's going up and down the keyboard and almost like these clusters. But again, it has such an emotional pull to it. This would be a really nice intro if you want to hear, again, those kind of two distinctive strains, but still blended in nicely enough that, again, even if it's jarring at first blush, there's so much going on within each piece, you're kind of ready for a change almost. At least, I kind of feel that way, because just for the variety of each piece. But yeah, holographic tapestries, kind of an interesting concept here. Now we have one of my personal favorites of his, Beauty Drifting. This one's from '96. Now on here, this is mostly piano led. I'm not sure if he's ever done a solo piano album. He might have done one more recently, but on here it's primarily piano, along with VL1 virtual acoustic synthesizer, which emphasizes a lot of woodwind sounds like clarinet or English horn. It's subtly orchestral, almost like maybe like a small chamber group, but very much with the piano at the fore. Again, his own approach. Although out of all of his albums, this might be the one that's stylistically is consistent from beginning to end. So you get pretty much the same thing throughout. And this might be a good starter if you're into someone, if you like contemplative solo piano, Debussy, Harold Budd, various, across that spectrum of solo keyboard music. It's just beautiful. Again, romantic, emotional, but again, without being too syrupy or going over that edge. It really has a nice balance. And again, he throws in little things here and there that, it takes more concentrated listening and, kind of letting it wash over you. But yeah, absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, if that's your orientation, it would be a really good place to start. On this final one here, well, I could have shown this with the thought tones, I guess, although this is very much its own thing. Ambient Realms. I think basically his version of a library record, where you can see this is a bunch of very short pieces, basically like little samples or tissues of sound and approaches. Really it is like something out of library music. Just little sound effects, little snippets here and there. You can see how many pieces there are. Yeah, there are 63 pieces total. Sometimes some are only a few seconds long. But probably one of those things for people who are really, really big fans like me, or if you're just curious about pure sound and how he was utilizing it, and it's just another approach. So yeah, I think that's it for what I have here. Yeah, again, I don't know how much was conveyed here, but I'd been wanting to do this for so long. Probably left out half of what I really wanted to say. But he's an artist that I just have enjoyed for quite a while, and still want to get back into exploring what he's done in more recent years. But yeah, again, if you like keyboard that just has so much variety and depth, and yet yeah, it's spoken to me for quite a while, and yeah, check him out. I wanted to do what I was doing for I think Richard got a lot of us going with his contest with his sampler. So I'm tempted to make samplers for everyone now. It's such a neat idea, and I'm thinking of trying to do something like that for him. Even though his stuff's a little harder to find as far as listening, got to look a little further. But I'll try to put something together, and maybe if I think of it, I'll try to link it or list some recommended pieces to start with if you just want to just start in general, or just go for his own sampler here. But yeah, Kit Watkins, a keyboardist, composer worth checking into. So yeah, hope you find something interesting there, and yeah, we'll see what comes next, and I'll probably be further revisiting and want to see more, and we'll see what happens in the future. So hope we're all well. Until the next one, peace, love, and joy.